Hello everyone, it is your educator Umar this side, and this is my first lecture. And in today's lecture, we'll be going through one of the most important topics from human physiology, which is breathing and exchange of gases. Well, let me give you a disclaimer that this is just a revision series. We will be covering only the most important topics, the topics which are very relevant, the topics which are asked frequently in the NEET exam, and we'll be focusing basically on letting you revise all the important topics. All right, let's get into it. Well, in this chapter, we will be having 6 subtopics, and each topic will be covered in each lesson. Okay, so in today's lesson, I'll be covering basically respiratory organs. In the coming lessons, we'll be discussing mechanism and breathing, exchange of gases, transport of gases, regulator of respiration, and finally we'll end it with the disorders the related to the lungs or the respiration. Okay, so before starting the chapter and discussing about various respiratory organs and eventually the most important organ, which is lung, we need to clarify a dilemma which most of the students have. That is breathing and respiration synonymous? Well, are they synonymous? Let's let's see. What is the definition of breathing? Well, breathing is basically inhaling the atmospheric air and exhaling the unabsorbed alveolar air. Okay, so these are heavy scientific terms. If I tell you in normal ways, the atmospheric air is basically the oxygen, and the unabsorbed alveolar air is the byproduct, which is the carbon dioxide. Okay, so now what is respiration? Respiration is a total process of breathing and absorption of oxygen into blood. Okay, see, now you are seeing breathing itself in the definition of respiration. So basically respiration includes breathing, and in respiration is a total phenomena. Hence, breathing and respiration are not the same thing. All right, now since we are cleared with it, let's get into the topic. So the first topic, respiratory organs. Okay, now there are basically 4 different type of respiratory organs which are observed in various animals, though plant have also respiratory organs and they have a very different system comparative to the animals. But animals, when looked at their respiratory organs, have 4 different types of them. And this order which you are seeing, the first one as tracheal, the second one as branch, the third one as cutaneous, and the fourth one as pulmonary, are in order of their superiority in their complexity. Okay, so tracheal respiratory system involves tubes. Okay, and these tubes are seen in insects and earthworms. Well, if you have closely looked to an insect, in the bottom part of it, you will see that there are holes, and those holes are basically the tubes from which they respire. That is the most simplest organ for a respiration, and that is seen in insects. Well, it is important to remember the examples as well. Okay, so these tubes are the most simplest type of respiratory organ. And where are they seen? They are seen in insects and earthworms. Next one, the little more advanced type of a respiration from the tracheal is the branched ones. Okay, and what is it basically? These are basically gills. Now, when we think about gill, we directly tend to relate it to only the fish, okay, or a little bit extended aquatic fish family. but it is also seen in the aquatic arthropods and the mollusks. People tend to forget this very point, which is very important. Okay, so the branchial ones are seen in the aquatic arthropods, mollusks, and obviously the fish. The next one, which is a little more advanced, a little more superior, a little more complex type of respiratory organ, is the cutaneous ones. Now, cutaneous ones have direct relationship with the cuticles. Cuticles, or in simple terms, which we call it as the moist skin. Okay, moist skin, which we see in the amphibians, frogs basically. So they breathe to the moist skin. Now, one of the most important mistakes which people, the aspirants, do is that they forget the order. They get confused if gills are more advanced type of respiratory organ or the cuticles. Let me make it clear over here that the cuticles are more advanced respiratory organ than the gills. So it is important to remember this total order, the total hierarchy of respiratory organs. Now coming to the fourth, the last, the most complex, the most evolved, and the most highly efficient type of respiratory organ, which is the pulmonary respiratory organ of lung, which we humans have, most mammals have, and most of the terrestrial animals also it is seen. Okay, that's it. These are the four different types of respiratory organs. Okay, in this chapter we will be, since it is a human physiology lesson, we'll be focusing mainly on the pulmonary respiratory organ of lung. Okay, everything surrounding the lung will be studied in this chapter. All right, and basically we'll be studying it about the humans. So let's get started. Okay, so the subtopic, which is 1.1.1, is about the whole human respiratory system. Now, see, that is a very vast topic. It has lots of points, but we'll be focusing on the most important ones, which is the questions which are directly asked from it. One of the first questions which is asked from this huge topic is about the pathway, the whole pathway of the human respiratory system. There are various options given, and you need to take the first, the correct one. And people have a lot of doubt in this section, but we will be going through it. So the pathway starts from the nose holes, which are technically called as the nostrils, and they are externally present. So external nostrils, and then it is followed by the ENT section of the nasal chamber. So from the external nostril it goes to the nasal chamber, and then it goes to pharynx. Now see, pharynx is a place where people get confused the most. Pharynx, larynx, they sound the same, and then trachea, and then what is the whole structure, people confuse. I'll clear that right in front of you now. So pharynx, remember, it is a common passage for food and the wind. It is a common vacuole where food and the wind are initially, as we eat the food it goes into the pharynx, as we breathe it goes into the pharynx. So it is a common passage. And then what is larynx? Larynx is basically the sound box. Okay, what is it? It is a sound box. Larynx is a sound box, and trachea is the windpipe. This sound box is covered with a structure called as a glottis, which we'll be studying in digestion lesson. But we need to mention another important structure which covers the glottis, called as the epiglottis. Now, see, the function of epiglottis is uh, reflecting one. Okay, it basically doesn't allow the food to enter trachea, the food to enter the windpipe. That's why they say that you should not stuff a lot of food so that you make the job of the epiglottis a lot harder. And then if food enters the windpipe, it has its consequences. Okay, so from the pharynx, it goes to the trachea. Trachea, as we know, is guarded by the epiglottis, and trachea is basically the windpipe. And then from the windpipe, it goes to the bronchi. Okay, bronchi or bronchus in plural is where the trachea divides. Okay, bronchus is of three types. The first one is the primary type. Okay, primary is the first division. This one is the primary bronchi. The second one is the one which divides in more branches from the primary bronchi. Okay, from the primary bronchi, it gets divided into more branches, as you can see. Now this division is the secondary bronchi, and then from the secondary bronchi there are more lot of divisions, which we call it as the tertiary bronchi. Okay, these tertiary bronchi then gets divided into lots of smaller branches called as bronchioles, or they are called as terminal bronchioles. These are also branch structures, and then this whole bronchi thing is followed by a very special structure, and the whole defining unit of the whole human respiratory system, that is the alveoli. So we will be discussing about alveoli in detail, the whole structure, the whole function of it. But this is how the pathway goes from the nose to the nasal chamber to the pharynx, which is the common place, to guarded by the epiglottis to the trachea, and then from the trachea to the bronchi. Bronchi are of various types, from the primary bronchi to the secondary, from the secondary to the tertiary, and then to the terminal bronchi, and then from the terminal bronchi it goes to alveoli. That's clear. Okay, so now we'll be discussing some of the important observations from the last diagram. It is the same diagram, the whole lung structure. So in the last one, we saw the epiglottis and the glottix and then larynx and the pharynx. And now we will be moving down to the trachea, the windpipe. So trachea, as you can see, these structures over here, these ring-like structures, they are called as cartilaginous rings. And what does they do? They help in supporting the trachea to maintain its structure. Okay, there are various types of gases which goes into the trachea, and trachea can collapse anytime. But what is the structure which helps so that it stands and does it function? It is the cartilaginous rings. And this trachea, the windpipe, extends to the mid-thoracic region. What is the mid-thoracic region? It is this region. This region, the mid-thoracic region, okay, MTR, is where it extends, the trachea extends. And then where it divides, see, these are very important things. What supports the trachea? It's the cartilaginous rings. Till where it extends till the mid-thoracic region. And then where does the trachea divide? It divides in the fifth transtracheal vertebra. Okay, it derives in the it is the thoracic vertebra. So it divides in the fifth thoracic vertebra, and you can see it is getting diverted, it is getting divided. Important point. The next thing is that the whole thoracic chamber, this whole structure is the thoracic chamber, where it is said to be an airtight structure, which means that no air can enter it and no air from that structure goes outside. You can see airtight structures in an aeroplane. The door of the aeroplane is airtight so that no external air comes out from outside comes in, and no air from the inside can go outside. Now, how does this whole thoracic chamber maintain its airtightness? It is due to the location of the thoracic chamber. It is very unique. Uh, so let's see where it is located. Dorsally means backwards. In backside, it is supported by the vertebral column. It is supported by the vertebral column. Now, what is vertebral column? It is basically the spine. So the spine from the backside dorsally supports the thoracic chamber, and ventrally it is supported by the sternum. Okay, so ventrally it is supported by a structure called as sternum. Ventrally, from the front, what is sternum? It is the chest bone which is present from the front side. It covers the thoracic chamber, and then from laterally it is covered by uh, the ribs. It is covered by the ribs, all right. And then from the lower side it is covered by a special structure called as diaphragm. Now this has a lot of importance. We'll be studying about it in detail in the next chapter, in the coming lessons. But the whole thoracic chamber is airtight because of this structure. So backwards with the spine, okay, and from the front because of the chest bone, which we technically called as sternum. You need to remember that. And then from the sideways, it is covered by the ribs. And then from the lower part, it is covered by a dome-like structure called as the diaphragm, as you can see it in the diagram. So now we'll be discussing about the conduction part and the exchange part. People usually get confused in this also, and since people get confused in this, the examiner tends to put that in the exam. So where is this conduction part and where is the exchange part? Okay, we will be discussing it. So basically remember that the conduction part starts from the external nostrils and extends towards the trachea. Basically, this region is the conduction part. Okay. And then the next region, the whole region inside the lungs, is the exchange part. Okay. The whole region inside the lungs is called as the exchange part. Now, how do you remember this? Remember it by the name. Conduction part, it means it conducts the atmospheric air. It it acts as a host for the atmospheric air. What acts? The whole structure from the nose to the tracheal, to the end of the trachea where it divides, all right. So what is the function of the conduction part? It has three major functions. The first one is to transport. Basically, the air we inhale, it transports it to the exchange part, most important one. The second one is clean the foreign particles. It is basically done in the nostril section where we have nose hairs. Majority of the foreign particles are covered from there only. And then as the air proceeds down, the atmospheric air is brought to body temperature. So these are the three important functions done by the conduction part, which starts from the external nostrils and end towards the trachea. And the next one, which is the exchange part, is the whole part inside the lung. Okay, so it has a primary function and the most important function. What is it? It provides a site. It provides a site for the diffusion of oxygen and the carbon dioxide. Basically that. Okay, now we will be moving to the next important uh, labeling which you might have seen over here. That is the pleural membrane. See, the whole thoracic chamber has lungs inside, but lungs has its own protection. Lungs is protected by a structure called as pleural membrane. This pleural membrane has pleural fluid inside it. What is the primary role of a pleural membrane? Remember it? It is used to decrease the friction of the lung surface. So the whole friction of the lung surface is decreased by the pleural fluid present inside the pleural membrane. Now there are two different types of pleural membranes. There are the inner pleural membrane and the outer pleural membrane. The inner pleural membrane is over here and the outer pleural membrane is over here. So the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface, okay, the whole lung surface, and the outer pleural membrane is in contact with the thoracic lining. Basically that. Okay, so now this is the last topic of today's lesson, but this is also a directly asked question from All India Pre-Medical exam, that the whole respiration, how is it followed? So these are the steps. Basically, breathing, which is also called as pulmonary ventilation, takes in the atmospheric air, okay, and then gives out alveolar air, which is rich in CO2, which is actually a byproduct. And then this whole system is followed by diffusion of gases. Which two gases? The oxygen and carbon dioxide, where across the alveolar membrane, we recently discussed about the alveoli, and in that alveoli membrane, it has a membrane and where diffusion takes place. So from the alveoli membrane, these gases travel and get diffused and absorbed into the blood. So these gases are transported from the alveoli membrane to the blood, and then from the blood, these gas goes into the tissue, where the most important type of diffusion takes place. And then in this catabolic reaction happens, where O2 is used up and CO2 is released as a byproduct. This is the final step of a respiration. Well, I'll be ending this lesson over here, but it is important to remember this order as there have been questions asked from this. I'll be coming up with the next topic. See you in the next lesson. Happy learning and thank you so much.